ora koutou katoa. Haere mai ki a Raw Politics, te pakihere roki tō rangapu o Newsroom. Ia wiki ka korora mātou I ngā mea nui I te ao tō rangapu. Ko Marc Daalder ahau. Hello and welcome to Raw Politics, Newsroom's weekly political podcast on the big issues of the week. I'm senior political reporter Marc Daalder. Our usual host Laura Walters is unable to join us for a bit, but joining me in Auckland is Newsroom co-editor Tim Murphy and Newsroom Pro editor Jonathan Milne. Kia ora korua. How are you guys doing up there?
Kia ora. Well, it's windy. We're going to be blown away before we get finished.
Well, the weather in Wellington today, aren't we? The weather in Wellington is wonderful as always. Can't beat it on a good day. Before we jump into our topics, I wanted to ask, what are you both doing or have done or learning or have learnt for Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori?
Well, mine would be a vignette, Mark, from Parliament's general debate this week, watching Labour MP Penny Henare in a very gentle and positive but plaintive speech about Te Reo in Te Reo, in which he reached out to members of the House and beyond via the radio to the community, saying, please don't be scared by Te Reo, that Te Reo has never committed a crime, Te Reo has never caused offence, and just basically saying, let yourself learn from it so that you can feel the essence of being Māori. It was really thought-provoking and interesting, and he wasn't making too much of it. It was a really lovely kind of moment, I think, in the week.
Jono?
Well, I'm embarrassed to admit I've probably spent more time learning Cook Islands Māori than I have spent learning New Zealand Māori when I lived over there. But like Christopher Luxon, as he said this week, I wish I knew a little bit more of it. I can at least call it Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, which he seems to insist on calling it Māori Language Week.
It's one of those public sector directives, maybe, that maybe we'll get into. Well, today on Raw Politics, we've got three topics to discuss. Tuatahi, the Minister of the Week, is Paul Goldsmith. He's the face of a bunch of different things going on this week, so we'll delve into him and what makes him tick. Tuarua, the awkwardness of sort of the deindustrialization of rural New Zealand under a pro-business government. And Tuatoru, Chippy's British expedition to figure out how to make a Labour Party win an election. And as always, we'll wrap up with some recommendations. Paul Goldsmith is the face of the government this week on 2.5 key issues. The big one is law and order. It's the theme of the week, and particularly sentencing changes and the passage of the gangs legislation. A lot of controversy or discussion this week over the ban on gang patches within private homes, that police will have powers to go in and confiscate and search for gang symbols and logos within the homes of people who have previously breached the gang patch laws. He's also the Arts, Culture and Heritage Minister, so he is one of the two faces of the government on Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. He says he's learning a whakatauki every single day of the week. I believe the first one that he learned on Monday was about how the shark, always strikes true. Take from that what you will. And then spilling over from last week into this week, there's a scathing report from the Waitangi Tribunal on Paul Goldsmith's handling of changes to the Marine and Coastal Areas Act, something we've discussed on this podcast before, in his role as the Minister for Treaty Negotiations. I think the big thing in the headlines, this week really is that gang patch bit. So we'll start off there. It's interesting because Paul Goldsmith, is in other capacities quite a vocal proponent of free speech. But here we've got a law that allows police to go into people's homes and search for particular symbols that they may have and criminalizing just the possession of something in your own home that isn't necessarily doing any harm to anyone. It also came after Goldsmith initially rejected including that in the legislation, and only after Select Committee, on police advice, reintroduced it into the bill. No ability for submissions. It's a story actually broken by our Laura Walters a few weeks ago, and it's become a big issue down here in Wellington. Jono, I'm curious, what do you think about this change? Is this a free speech issue? Is it hypocritical for the government to be regulating what we've got in our homes, even if it is a Chicago Bulls T-shirt or a mongrel mob patch?
Look, I think you'd have to be a pretty staunch civil libertarian to choose gang patches as your cause célèbre for fighting for free speech. I can think of a lot of free speech issues out there that genuinely concern me, and gang patches isn't top of the list. I'm more interested in its efficacy. I quite like the comeback from some opponents that it would make it harder for police to know who the gang members are when they try and prosecute them. And
Tim, the other big issue of the week is the Waitangi Tribunal report. You've written a decent piece on Newsroom, a great piece, but goes into decent detail about what the Waitangi Tribunal has said about Paul Goldsmith in particular. Can you break that down for us?
I will, Mark. Just quickly, if I can pick up on the gang patches thing and the justice thing. Two things out of that, re Goldsmith. One is there's a shared element to the two topics of Goldsmith we're talking about this week, and that's how he does or does not take cognizance of official advice and at what stage of the process. And it seems that it's a little bit loose where Paul Goldsmith's concerned in terms of how and where he's willing to adopt and bring in changes to the process of making law. The second aspect was he got up in the House this week to defend the gang patches in homes element of this. And one of the aspects of it is that you have to have offended against gang patch bans before they could go into your house and say you've got a gang patch on or in your cupboard. So it's a little bit remote, the risk, but it's there. But his defense of it was what people always say when they're taking illiberal measures to law, that is, if you don't offend, you've got nothing to fear. And that was said several times. If you don't offend, then you won't be having police looking for your gang patch in your house. Just don't wear one and just don't offend. Jono's right. There's not much of a public, I'm sure, sympathy for people with gang patches hanging over their couches or gracing their frames of their things, framed, pictures in their home or wherever else. But it's just one more thing, that if you've got nothing to hide, why would you worry about the state claiming another step in that? Now, sorry, to go to the point you asked me, which is about the Marine and Coastal Areas Act, Takatai Moana. Yes, the Waitangi Tribunal report this week, and I'll try and be quick about this, was fascinating in that it analysed as much the change to the law and the breaches of the treaty, as much as that, it looked at the approach and the, I was going to say behaviour, it's not the right word, but the actions of the minister, Goldsmith, and found him wanting on a whole series of areas, from right back to what's the problem you're trying to fix here? Is there actually a risk of anything being at risk from the Marine and Coastal Areas Act and the Court of Appeal's interpretation of its customary marine rights? Is there anything that's done that's actually made the beaches or the rights of anyone else more at risk? And they posit that there isn't, and that there never was, and that Goldsmith took this on. It was a New Zealand First Coalition Agreement amendment to the law to reverse what they said was the Court of Appeal going too far and making it too easy for Māori, hapu and iwi to get CMT. But Goldsmith's view was to take it even further, and it was one that they found he hadn't established a problem, that he didn't listen at all to anyone in the process, any officials from any department, until he took a paper to Cabinet and more senior Cabinet colleagues told him they wanted changes. And this was presented by the Crown as him listening and consulting. So, but look, I counted 15 plus aspects where they nominated the minister actively not conducting this process as they say it ought to be conducted. So, look, it was quite a stunning report in those in that genre. Yeah.
I think one of the things you picked out that I thought was maybe you could tell there was a sense of wryness in whoever was writing the report, saying that the only engagement that Paul Goldsmith appeared to have conducted with any New Zealanders was a sole meeting with the fishing industry over this, and no meetings at all with Māori before Cabinet had made their decisions on their approach. I'm curious. This is a New Zealand First initiative, but it does seem to be something that Paul Goldsmith has adopted wholeheartedly himself. Like some of the other law and order policies that they've advanced have come from ACT or New Zealand First, and he just picks it up and runs with it. Do you think, in light of this issue of him not always listening to official advice, which, we elect people to make decisions themselves, not to do what officials tell them, but, Paul Goldsmith as an ideologue or as a minister, where does he kind of sit on that spectrum? Or not to say are the two mutually incompatible?
Well, it was interesting. To me, and I've seen him about his business for quite a few years, he's a intriguing character. He's not, I was going to say he's not dumb. He's a well-informed, he's across things, he's a musician and an author, and he's been at the heart of national politics for more than a dozen years. And each of the leaders they've had seems to have warmed to him and regarded him. He's in the kitchen cabinet, isn't he, for Luxon now, and he was finance spokesperson for Judith Collins and had the famous, hole in his budget, allegedly, that wobbled him and that campaign. But I think this report and it's not so much the report, it's the review of all the official advice and even the redacted official advice they were able to show in the Waitangi Tribunal's report, shows him as more of an ideologue, more of a embracer and enthusiast for some of these measures, and also for an impatience to not be beholden or held up by some of the things that he and his government regards as kind of impediments and hurdles. So I think it does show, and probably if we apply it to the gang patches and the criminal justice issues, he's got a stronger vein through him of strong politics as well as policy. Just to finish on this, one of the things the Waitangi Tribunal observed was that he used the entire policy process on the MACA reforms not to inform himself, but to inform officials. Which I thought was a wry comment, Mike.
My last question, just real quick, is you mentioned his stint as finance spokesperson, and it seems that after that incident with the budget numbers, apparently not quite adding up, he fell maybe in the graces of the party. Has he redeemed himself now? Is this the Paul Goldsmith that but for an Excel spreadsheet error we might have seen since 2020?
I'll go quickly, and then John, I'd like your view on it too. But I think probably, yeah, I think he's well back now. He's he's a Minister of Justice, Treaty Negotiations. He's in that cabinet, kitchen cabinet at least. And, I think he's probably endeared himself to his coalition partner parties quite a lot as well through this process.
This may have been driven by New Zealand First, but I think we have to say that he has embraced it. We've seen alternative bills like the Treaty Principles Bill where National said, we're not really comfortable with this, so here you go, David Seymour, you can run this one. But the fact that Paul Goldsmith has owned this and embraced it suggests that he is, in my view, the ideologue that he appears to be.
This week we had another announcement of a big industrial facility closing its doors. That's the paper mill in Penrose, Auckland, following the Winstone sawmill and pulp mills from a couple of weeks ago. The perpetrator, ostensibly, is high power prices. That's what the companies say. That's what the government says. That's what the opposition says as well. But everyone's pointing fingers at someone else. The government blames Labour's oil and gas ban. The opposition says the government just sat back and let it happen. And everyone seems pretty unhappy with the gentailers who are, they say, driving the prices up. Jono, break this down for us. Who is to blame here? Where should we be pointing our fingers?
Yeah, look, every element of that blame game has an degree of truth about it, I think we should say. All of these things are partly true. Winstone Pulp in Ruapehu District was outspoken about having to pay for electricity at twice the rates of corporates like Rio Tinto down near Bluff, the aluminium smelter. To be clear, OG Fibre, which is down the road from me in Penrose, it has not just blamed electricity prices, but also gas and labour and supply costs. So they are taking, I guess, a broader approach. I think perhaps there's an extent to which the media and politicians have picked up on the narrative around power prices and focus that around OG Fibre more than the company itself would. It's going to hit my community. I live in Onehunga, and this is 75 jobs gone from our community, and just perhaps not to the same extent as Ruapehu, but it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. It'll spin through to local retailers and everyone else. In very blunt terms, the electricity market here is actually working precisely as it was intended to. And as these players fall out of the market and their demand falls out of the market, what we should see happening is, to a small degree, the prices going down. Less demand from them means that other people can pick up that capacity. I think the real question, though, is not whether it's working as it's intended, but whether it's working as it should for New Zealand. And that's where there's an energy competition task force coming in. They do have 8 different areas they're going to work on, and there's prospect for some of those areas to make a small difference, I think, in terms of improving the market.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear even the first union, I think, spokesperson on the OG paper mill closure saying, look, the writing has been on the wall for a while here in terms of previous years of poor financial results. So it's not a huge surprise that you've got this business that's maybe sitting on the fence and then these high power prices and high energy prices come along and knock it over. With the Winstone mill, it did seem to be a slightly different situation where it was really electricity that they were talking about. Is that fair to say? And to my eyes, to be fair, not an expert here, but it feels like no one is really looking at the mill owners for, not hedging. Everyone knows that the New Zealand electricity market is exposed to dry years. We've got tight gas supply. Nothing that's happened here came out of the blue, and say 12 months ago you would have said that's not possible, it couldn't happen. So do you think, Jono, that maybe some of the fingers, as maybe politically inconvenient as that may be, should be pointed back at the businesses?
Yeah, and look, I think what Winstone Pulp was doing was making excuses a little bit for challenges in their own business. What I've also ascertained is that Winstone Pulp sold back a month worth of hedges back in August in order to cover their payroll. So they were already in trouble. Clearly, they were already struggling. They then left themselves extraordinarily vulnerable when the wholesale prices went through the roof, and they abandoned their hedges. And so they do have to take some responsibility for that themselves. They've been very vocal in criticising Mercury. They entered into a war of words with Mercury, but it's more complex than that, and they do have to take some responsibility.
Tim, let's bring the kind of politics back into this. You've got a government that's very pro-business, pro-manufacturing, pro-industry, especially pro-regions. We've got I can't remember the latest name for it, but, the Regional Development Fund, Regional Growth Fund, Provincial Growth Fund, as many acronyms as you can that say regional or provincial. Is it awkward for them? How awkward is it for them that they're here for 8 months and already you've had 3 big facilities shut down, including 2 in the regions, presiding over another step in the deindustrialization of New Zealand?
It's 10 months, isn't it? Aren't we? Our time frames are
Time
condensing.
flies, doesn't it? When you're having fun.
It's only 1 month short of a year since the election, not since the government was formed. But anyway, look, it is awkward, but governments inherit things as well. And I noticed Luxon this week in the House in defending something on economic policy, saying, look, this is just a lag. This is the lag effect. And they do. They cop a lag effect, whichever administration comes in. So in this case, we've mentioned it many times on this podcast over the last couple of years, the UK Prime Minister Harold Macmillan's famous dictum that, what's the biggest political risk? And he said, events, dear boy, events. Well, here we are. We get a government in there that is pro-business, very intent on jobs and economic growth and exports and all these things. But events come along like this, a dry year, and obviously supply issues, as Jono said, all these things come together, and it happens on their watch, and the politics of it doesn't look good. That, here you are, a pro-business, pro-regions, pro-exports sort of government on the face of it, but you're losing these jobs and closing down opportunities in industries. It happens, as I said, across the board. I remember when Labour and the Greens were in power in 2017-20, the Green, was it Julian Genter, I think, became an associate transport spokesperson. And she's a public transport and modal transport reform kind of person, and it's her go. But as part of that, she inherited or was given the responsibility for the road toll. And not long after she got that gig and they came in power, there was a terrible run of deaths on the road. And suddenly it became her as minister responsible and that administration's problem, when these things just can happen and they can also be lags. So yes, I think for this government is awkward, and they would be a bit dispirited by the series of outfits declaring and throwing in the towel. I think on the first ones, Jono, they tried, didn't they, down in Ruapehu, the government or MB or someone was involved in trying to keep things going there, were they?
Look, we've seen both the Labour government and then the national government both bail out the Ruapehu ski fields in the same district. But I think we mostly have to acknowledge that it would be an extraordinarily dangerous precedent if governments waded in and bailed out every business that got in trouble, especially every heavy industry. These are not the future of the New Zealand export economy, these businesses. And it may well be, we've already seen the North Skog paper mill closed down, and in part it was because there wasn't so much demand for newsprint as you guys started tuning in online instead of reading newspapers. So some of these industries have met their natural end. I think it sounds callous to say, and we can't have the government bailing out everyone to save jobs.
Yeah. Do you think that there's a counterfactual, an alternate universe where the government does step in here, and that what stopped them from doing so was ACT? Because you do have quite a different philosophy on these kinds of issues from New Zealand First and on the one hand and ACT on the other. Do you think that it would have ever been politically feasible for the government to do this if David Seymour hadn't been there, putting his foot down?
Yeah, I think there is a counterfactual, and it's called the People's Republic of China.
Is that?
And Mark, if you looked at a counterfactual the same way, if Labour had won that election 11 months ago, do we think with the weather that we've had and the electricity market that we've had and the same circumstances that government would have intervened to keep these 3 latest mills at least running? I don't. They might have made more noise and hoped and worked closer with the unions, everything else, but I don't know that would have happened either.
Sometimes shit just happens. Our question for this week is, how dangerous is it for Chris Hipkins to be travelling overseas? We've seen a tough poll result for Chippy this week from the Taxpayers Union Curia poll, showing his preferred PM rating down in the doldrums. And he's going to be heading off for 2 weeks to hang out with the UK Labour Party in London to learn what worked for them in changing the government and what didn't, although he acknowledges that the situation that Keir Starmer faced in upsetting a 14-year Conservative government is a bit different from what he's going to be trying to do in 2026. Tim, this poll, is the first one that looks properly bad for Chippy as an individual. Labour is still doing okay. They're in the high 20s, not where they'd want to be, but not dropping. How should we interpret this?
I think it's no surprises. This is the leader who led a party to 26% or whatever it was, and a sound throwing away of a pure majority 3 years earlier. Not all down to him, but he was the face of it. He was the campaign of it. And as I say, I think as that frustration the electorate showed with the incumbents weighs on him. Having said that, the Curia poll didn't poll the key people involved here, who are the Labour MPs, the 34 or whatever it is, Mark, who are left, and they don't have many options. He won't be under any risk whatsoever going away now, although the government benches in Parliament this week were hooting and loving the idea of taunting all of Labour with this. And it did prompt and get a headline column in the Herald as well, about the risk of him going. But I think there's no risk now, other than, eventually in this period, the next year and a half, they may well build that way. While the cat's away, these mice, I think, will just, keep muddling around and hoping.
Jono, do you think he's likely to be in trouble here, Chippy, going away for 2 weeks after a bad poll?
Look, immediately after the election, I heard that Carmel Sepuloni's supporters did run some numbers as to whether she could be a leadership prospect, but I think those were only in the eventuality that he might stand down. He didn't. So right now, I think he's probably in a fairly safe space. If there's a time to travel, this is probably about it. What I should say is we've never seen a one-term national government. So I think a lot of challengers would be thinking, maybe I'll bide my time. Maybe we'll let Chris serve out the whole term and then reconsider 3 years from now whether we want to change in the leadership, and when they might actually think they've got a better chance of Roland Luxon or whoever's leading the National Party at that point. I think for Labour, the bigger challenge for him right now is policy, and they're sitting there in this awkward position where they're disagreeing with national or national-led government actions, but they don't actually have any alternatives in place. And, you understand why. They don't want to be sort of tying their flag to the mast too early, too far out from the election. But it's a pretty dangerous position when you're Ginny Anderson out there criticising the gang patch ban, and then you're asked by a journalist doing their job, well, would you get rid of it? And she says, I don't know, we haven't formed a policy on that yet. It's pretty difficult for them. They've got the same thing with the capital gains tax. It's going to hang over them for the next few years as they work out what they're actually going to do around that policy.
Let's wrap things up with some recommendations, something that you've watched, read, or listened to this week that you enjoyed. I'll go first and get some brownie points by recommending Jono's piece on Newsroom, which is a really good read, delving into the background and the detail of a fisheries court case, but with the major treaty breach, one of those ones that has run along successive governments, maybe almost generational at this stage, looming in the background. Very much worth a read. Tim?
I'm praising one of the Herald pieces by Audrey Young. It's an explainer-style article that goes through all the government's law changes targeted at Māori. There are a lot, but it sets them out, what they're trying to do, why they're doing it, and what the implications and how much of pushback there might be.
Jono?
I've been reading a piece by The Economist, which is behind a paywall, I note, but so much of the world's best journalism is now, as it should be. It's on a British Medical Journal study on why Aussies have greater longevity than the rest of us in the Anglo world. They've pulled ahead of New Zealand, they've pulled ahead of the US, the UK, Ireland, and the previous frontrunner, Canada. One reason is that Aussies are less likely to die in car accidents than Kiwis and Americans, and that and their combination of free public health care and a lot of engagement in private health insurance means that basically they've got better healthcare at the top of the cliff than the rest of us. I should say that we all trail well behind some non-Anglo countries like Japan, Switzerland, and Spain.
That's it from Raw Politics for this week. Thank you to our producer, Trent Doyle, and our readers, listeners, and viewers. Have you got any burning thoughts that you need to share with the team or a question that you would like us to answer? You can get in contact at laura.walters@newsroom.co.nz. Ka kite anō next week here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.